بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم. The next chapter pertains to the Prophet ﷺ's mission, the bi'athah, and the different dates in relation to the mission of the Prophet ﷺ. So when he reached the age of 40, Allah Most High, blessed he sent the Holy Prophet ﷺ to all of mankind as a giver of glad tidings and a warner. But to all of kind as a giver of glad tidings and a warner. The angel Jibreel ﷺ brought the revelation from the Lord of the worlds in a cave on Mount Hira, saying, "Read," to which the Holy Prophet ﷺ responded, "I cannot read." The Holy Prophet ﷺ states, "He took hold of me and squeezed me until I was exhausted. Then he released me and said, 'Read.' I again replied, 'I cannot read.' The third time he said to me, 'Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq,' until 'allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam." The commencement of prophethood is mentioned to have occurred on Monday, 8th of the month of Rabiul Awwal. So the Prophet ﷺ, the day Monday is quite repetitive in the Prophet ﷺ's life. The Prophet ﷺ was born on a Monday. The Prophet ﷺ passed away on a Monday. The bi'athah took place on a Monday. Abu Lahab, in some riwayat, mentions that I mentioned that how Abu Lahab, he emancipated the slave girl Thuwayba on the glad tidings of the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. And that occurred on a Monday. So it's mentioned that he was seen in a dream, and this is an authentic report, that he was seen in a dream after he had passed. And someone asked him, "What has happened with you?" And he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined me towards the fire of Jahannam. But on days like Monday, Allah, He lightens the punishment on me because of the favor that I showed towards the Prophet of emancipating the slave. So Monday was quite repetitive in the life of the Prophet in terms of events that had occurred. The Prophet to commemorate that would fast on Mondays as well. Okay? And it's mentioned that I was born on a Monday, I was sent as a prophet on a Monday, and the fasting would take place as well. The commencement of prophethood is mentioned to have occurred on Monday, 8th of the month of Rabiul Awwal. Thereafter, so immediately after this, when I mean immediately, within a short period, the people of Mecca confined him ﷺ to a valley where he and his family lived for a little less than 3 years. And this is recorded in Bayhaqi and Dara'il. When the restrictions placed upon him were removed, the Holy Prophet ﷺ was 49 years of age. So if the restrictions were there for 3 years, so about 6 years after the Prophet ﷺ attained prophethood, the Prophet ﷺ went through that incident of being boycotted, a social boycott from the rest of the Quraysh. And so up until the boycott, there were many sort of attempts to try and persuade the Prophet ﷺ to leave this message. The very first person to object to the Prophet ﷺ was his own uncle, Abu Lahab. And from that, the persecution and the ridicule first, it was in stages. So initially it was not understanding what the message was and not willing to accept. When they saw that the movement was slightly growing, then whoever they had control over, like slaves, etc., then they would physically try and dissuade them from this by persecuting them. And with the Prophet ﷺ, initially they pleaded, they asked the Prophet ﷺ's guardians, Abu Talib at that time, well, not Abu Talib, but so the Prophet ﷺ's close confidants, Abu Talib and Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, they approached them, saying to them that, try and convince your nephew, try and convince your husband to stop this, as he's causing corruption in the people. When that didn't work, they tried to bribe the Prophet ﷺ, and eventually, after the bribery, there came a point where they tried to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ migrated. Before that assassination attempt, one final ploy that was deployed was trying to socially boycott both the Prophet ﷺ and the rest of the Muslims. And they hoped by doing so, it would cause such immense pressure, the boycott would cause such pressure that if not Muhammad ﷺ, the other people who didn't actually receive the message, were just following the message, would have caved in. And the boycott was extremely, extremely testing. Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he says, there were times where there was nothing to eat, and I would hide, when I would leave that area for my other errands, I would hide some leaves underneath my arms and bring them back to the Prophet ﷺ, and that's what they consumed at times. So there was very scarce in terms of what the boycott consisted of was no buying and selling. So if you were from the Muslim people and you were a business person, people would not trade with you. So that was totally cut off. They were not allowed to sell to people who were Muslims. They were not allowed to buy from them. The boycott went to the point of even relations. So those that were married, they were cut off from their spouses had they not accepted as of yet. Similarly, it was not allowed for someone from the Muslims to marry someone who was not of the Muslims. So a complete boycott in terms of the Muslims. And this lasted for 3 years, and at the age of 49, that's when, and even the incident of how the boycott ended is quite interesting. They had taken a pledge, and this was the practice of the Arabs, that they would do such things and they would write a covenant on certain things. So whenever they decided something, they had put it in writing. And so they had taken that covenant of this boycott against the Muslims and they had placed it on the Kaaba. And they said, as long as this is here, we will not back down from this. And so, because the Muslims were continuously monitored, they were unable to get to the actual covenant as well. It just so happened that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent some termites and insects that actually ate up the covenant. And when the covenant itself was no longer there, the boycott ended by itself. Approximately 8 months and 21 days later, so after the age of 49, his uncle, who was truly a support network for the Prophet ﷺ, passed away. And in some riwayats, 3 days later, and in other riwayats, that 1 month or just over a month later, his wife, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, also passed away. So these were very two important support networks for the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Talib was the one who, because of his presence, many around the Prophet ﷺ were physically abused and tortured and persecuted. But because of the presence of Abu Talib, the rest of the Quraysh were very weary of the Prophet ﷺ. They would ridicule, they would say stuff, but they wouldn't attempt on the Prophet ﷺ. And the reason for that is that Abu Talib was a chieftain of the Quraysh. He held immense power. So once the Quraysh actually approached Abu Talib and they said to him, look, go to your nephew and tell him, and this is in the latter stages, just before the boycott, that what he's doing is not good for us, it's not good for our society, it's not good for our people. He's changing what we are used to, what we were used to, what our forefathers have told us. We don't want to do anything with his teachings. He's not listened to what we have to say, so we have a proposal for you. The proposal for you is that, look, let's be real. Most people who come with these types of messages and most people who come with these types of things where they're developing followings, they're really not there for that. They want something in return. This is just a ploy to get something else. If he wants money, we'll make him the richest amongst us. We will pool together and give him all the money that he wants. If he wants kingdomship and sovereignty, we will make him our leader. No problem. As long as he stops teaching this. Because that, for us, our teachings are more important than leadership. And if it's marriage, women, you tell us. Give us what, tell him to let us know who he wants to marry, how many he wants to marry. We'll facilitate. So Abu Talib, he came back to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, nephew, listen, things are getting very difficult. I'm under a lot of pressure. I'm constantly having to protect you. I'm constantly having to defend you. And so the Quraysh, the chieftains, have come to me with a proposal. And he laid down the proposal that if he wants money, that we will give you money. If it's about leadership, they will make you the leader of our people. You can be the chief. If it's about marriage, then you can marry who you want. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he then addressed his uncle. And he said to him, Ya Ammi, oh uncle, listen. They have proposed what they consider what is important to me and why I'm doing this. And they haven't understood that this message is not my message, it's the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for you to understand, I want you to take a message back to them. And hopefully you'll get what I'm trying to sort of convey from the message. And the message is very simple. They can place the whole world and everything it contains and give that to me. Everything, whatever there is. Okay? The sun and the moon, the actual literal wordings that he used was you can put the sun in one hand, the moon in, meaning you can give me everything. Everything that you have, everything that you don't have, everything that you might have, whatever it is. You can propose all of that to me and give it to me. So kingdomship, being in control, having wealth, being able to marry who I want, all of that. And whatever else you can't think of. But by Allah, I will not give up this message of mine. There is no way that I will give up, because it isn't as you have perceived, that people want kingdomship and that's why they make something up and use that to develop the cult following, and through that cult following they gain their riches, this isn't that. I am here because Allah's angel came to me. He said, this is the message from Allah, you are the final prophet, and I am to pass this message on to the rest of humanity. So now you can give whatever you want. You can propose anything that you want. And so it's at that junction, Abu Talib, to show that, subhanAllah, despite, there are two opinions, but we won't go into that. What was his final fate? But he said at that moment, he went back to the Quraysh, and he said that, I've taken your proposal to my nephew, and my nephew has given his response. From now on, none of you are to look at him. He can, as long as I am alive, nobody is to say anything to him. He has my complete support. And it's with that support that the initial stages of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ was protected to some degree. That the Prophet ﷺ, again, went through difficulty, but he wasn't physically under continuous threat like the rest of the Sahaba were. Some of them who accepted Islam, in initial Islam, they went through immense persecution. And we've all heard the stories of the likes of Bilal radiallahu ta'ala and Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha and her family, the likes of Khabbab radiallahu ta'ala. When Umar radiallahu ta'ala saw the back of Khabbab radiallahu ta'ala later on in his khilafat, he was sitting with Khabbab and the qamis on his back moved sort of shifted from its place, and he saw what's that? And he just saw a bit of the back of Khabbab, and he said, what is that? So Khabbab radiallahu ta'ala responded that this is initial Islam. This is Islam. That these are the scars of saying La ilaha illallah. That this is what happened to us, those of us that were under somebody else's control. Somebody else owned us. We were slaves. Bilal radiallahu ta'ala was an Abyssinian slave. And so they went through immense persecution. As the Shaykh Nambarallahu Marqadahu, he writes that there were two mu'adhins, main mu'adhins in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. One was Abdullah bin Ibn Maktoum, and the second was Bilal radiallahu ta'ala. And many commentators write why was Bilal radiallahu ta'ala chosen as a mu'adhin of the Prophet ﷺ. Some opine, that it was his voice. He had a very loud voice, very clear voice, something that would travel very far distances, which would be the objective of the adhan. And as the Shaykh, he says, my opinion is that Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the words that he would use at the time of his persecution, of Ahad, one Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repays that later in life with him being the one who calls towards Allah and calls towards Salah in adhan. And so Khabbab radiallahu ta'ala, he says that the reason why you see these scars on my back is that we would be persecuted in the most devilish and heinous of ways. It's unimaginable that the molten hot sand, and I say that with, it literally is burning in the desert heat when the sun is at its zenith, when the sun is just sort of climaxing at its peak. It's at times, when you go for Umrah, you're now in a place that's very developed. That's not the real actual climate that the Sahaba lived through, because of the buildings, because of the infrastructure, the different materials that are used. It's not. If you go into the desert at peak heat time, it's near impossible. In fact, sometimes when we go for Umrah in the high season, people can't go even though there's all these facilities. Or how are you going to make it from your hotel to the Haram? It's so hot. You go outside for just the 5-minute or 3-minute walk in the courtyard, and it's sort of like, it's so difficult to go through. But without all that, just barren land, the Sahaba, Khabbab radiallahu anhu, he says that we would be made to lie down on this burning sand. And when that wasn't enough, they would burn coal. So they would burn coal and place it in like a pit in that sand. and then they would lie us down on top of that. And so, if you can imagine, it's almost as if, but they would keep it at such a distance that it wouldn't kill the person, but just continuous torturous. And the objective wasn't that person dies. The objection was continued torture. That was the objective. And Khabab radiallahu ta'ala says, at times, the scars and the wounds were so great that the pus and the blood that would come out of my back would put out the colon leaf. So immense difficulty that they had to go through and endure. In that period, Abu Talib was a support network for the Prophet ﷺ. And so the loss of Abu Talib radiallahu ta'ala, they actually state in the books of hadith that the year the Prophet ﷺ lost his uncle and lost his wife, Khadija radiallahu, same year, as I mentioned, two opinions, either 3 days after Abu Talib passes away, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala passes away, or 1 month and a few days after. So it's a very short period. They refer to that year as Amul Huzn, the year of grief. That's how difficult it was for the Prophet ﷺ. Very, very difficult, the loss of his uncle and his wife. The jinn of Nasibin came to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and accepted Islam when he was 50 years and 3 months old. So now the Prophet ﷺ has started propagating. The Prophet ﷺ has gone through the boycott. The Prophet ﷺ, the threats are becoming more and more intense because his support network is not there. Abu Talib isn't there. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala isn't there. And there's actually attempts on the life of the Prophet ﷺ, physical attacks on the Prophet ﷺ. So at the age of 50, the jinn of Nasibin, it's a group of jinn that came and accepted Islam on the hands of the Prophet ﷺ. At 51 years and 9 months, the Holy Prophet ﷺ was made to travel by night from the well of Zamzam and the Maqam of Ibrahim to Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis, thereafter ascending the skies till the Prophet ﷺ went and met Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, this section of what happens from 51 years and this journey and how Masjid al-Aqsa, some elements of that, inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, we'll continue with that tomorrow. Allah grant me the understanding, all of you the understanding. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallah wa bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا.